Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Chris Rossini as co-host. Chris, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. Great to be with you.
Very good. You know, the big news in the last couple of days obviously has been a domestic issue, and that has to do with the killings that occurred in Las Vegas. And of course, it's very serious, but there's a lot of speculation. But since it's happened and since the obvious details were unknown at the beginning and they're starting to come out, but the big news for me has been the obsession with interest in the motive. You know, why would somebody want to do this? I think very important. I think that's a question they should always ask. But it's a question they never ask, when some terrorists come into our country or there's terrorists kill Americans overseas, they never say, what really is the motive behind those individuals who want to kill Americans? Well, we don't know exactly the motive behind Pollock in this incident, but, you know, there's already been suggestions, connection to ISIS. ISIS is claiming, support for him. He has a wife that might have connections to the Middle East. So it goes on and on. And I think it's correct to ask about these, about what exactly the motives are. From the surface, I'd have to say that, it really fits the lone wolf, lone nut answer to this, but still it's pretty outrageous, and it suggests, the first thing it suggests to me, the NSA and the CIA and the FBI, they do a little spying on us. They know what we had for breakfast last week. They know where we spend our money, and they know where our cell phone is, but they don't know a guy that has 23 rifles in a hotel overlooking thousands of people. So, and some people say, well, that's why we need more surveillance. That's why we need more gun control. And they'll go on. And yet the surveillance that we have had, how can you give the government more surveillance over the people? And I think generally in the last several years, anything that had to do with any suggestion of terrorism, the government gets the authority. The Congress just rolls over and say, oh, if it's necessary, we need a Patriot Act. We need, FISA courts. We need more authority because, we're under attack. So there's a lot of questions being raised, and it may turn out that this guy is just plain nuts and went on a rage. Now, his family history even suggests the possibility of mental illness and compulsive criminal behavior, and it may be that. But then there's also the other questions, and rightfully they should do the investigation. But I think the whole issue is that some people will take advantage of this. The far left say, well, obviously we need more gun control, and the other side will say, well, no, we need more surveillance, we need more maneuvering. And I saw an announcement say, anytime you see anything suspicious, report it. So everybody's supposed to spy on their neighbors and spy on people in hotels in order to solve this problem. But we may live in an age of culture of violence, in many ways. Maybe as individuals, there's a lot of violence in our streets, but maybe not even more than it used to be. But then we have the issue of the violence that our government participates. What are your thoughts on this, Chris, about looking for the motive and why this might have occurred?
Well, the first thing, obviously, that I noticed was immediately the knee-jerk reaction, and it's become predictable now, is to go straight to the government, for federal government to provide some kind of one-size-fits-all solution. And we really need to think about that, because governments, and especially ours, they've destroyed entire nations and threatened to destroy even more. North Korea, totally obliterate. And when we look back at the killing of 500,000 Iraqi children, and our Secretary of State said it was worth it. The federal government is militarizing the local police. So when it comes to violence, to look to this institution for solutions and to make more rules, thinking about rules, the federal government has a constitution, and they don't follow their own rules. They don't follow their own laws. So isn't it odd that the knee-jerk reaction is to look to an institution that is the most violent on earth and it doesn't follow the rules for a solution. Isn't that strange, Dr. Paul?
It is, and the statistics support your point. The third month of this administration in March, for instance, that's the only number I have in front of me, we killed over 1,400 civilians in Syria and Iraq, and probably a bunch since then. But they don't count. They're not even on the horizon. But our government is very violent. And what I've used as an example of what's been happening is we as libertarians like the issue of Bastia, the law, that anything that we're not allowed to do, like lie, cheat, and steal, which is very good rules, the government shouldn't be allowed to do it either. Yet the government lies, cheats, and steals and kills also. I mean, more so. And what's happened is the government now is doing it instead of the people's restraints on violence affecting the government and causing them to do less. The violence of the government and them resorting to violence all the time, it causes the people to accept this notion you can use violence. But I think there's a subtle acceptance of violence that even more significant, or at least equal to the violence you're mentioning, and it's the violence of the activities of Republicans and Democrats and liberals and conservatives on the use of violence in government, just about everything they do. You know, somebody's hospitalized. Well, we need the government to take care of it. Well, that's good. You know, we want to help people. But where's the government going to do that? So whether it's a flood or a fire or whatever, it's always the use of force. All welfareism is the use of force. All corporate welfare is use of force. And that's in addition to the use of force overseas, telling other people to do. So we do live in a violent culture, and those who love it, are the ones who want gun control on the people. And we have heard stories about some very, very liberal congressmen in Washington who have guns and are always arguing for gun control. And they've literally said out loud, but we're special people. We have to be protected. We have to have more guards, and we have more guns protecting us because we take care of the people. I think subtly that's what's really bugging people. It isn't ever said explicitly, but it's one of the reasons why the people feel so frustrated with what's going on today in this interrelationship with government and the people.
Yes, and in order to break this mind hold that everybody has to look to the government, we really have to start looking to ourselves and to private protection. I mean, every property owner, it's their property. They are responsible for what happens there. And they should be able to choose between an array of private competing alternatives for security. And those companies, if they fail, they could go bankrupt. So their livelihood is on the line to protect places and to really think of everything. And it has to be done on a local level. This is such a huge country that to think that some people in Washington could create this blanket law or blanket to cover every single nook and cranny of this country, it's an impossibility. It has to be done with people that have skin in the game and on a level where the people are actually on the ground and involved with their own properties.
You know, I would say the people who have won so far in claiming they understand the motive or the problems we have would be the anti-gun people, regulate the guns. If we did that, they never question about what about a much more disastrous event on 9/11. I mean, nearly 3,000 people died just in a short period of time, and it was done without a gun. It was done with box cutters and airplanes. And do we outlaw box cutters and airplanes? How about automobiles as a weapon? They're being used in places where there's more restrictions on guns. So it isn't the weapon itself that is the problem. There's something more more that determines this, and that is the use of violence. After 9/11, immediately the question was, what was the motive behind this? The answer popped up immediately, just like the answer so far on this is too many guns, we'll regulate guns. But after 9/11, it was instantaneous. Well, they attack us for our freedoms. They attack us for our prosperity, for our Constitution, and for our liberties. And that has stuck. The President Bush put that out there, and they repeated it over and over and over again. And therefore, they establish the instrument of the attack on us. And this is They've totally denial, and they're in total denial. They've never saw the aftermath. Matter of fact, the goal was to cover up the real reason that we were attacked, and of course that was blowback. More people now believe that to be the case than there were around when I first talked about that in a presidential debate. You know, back then it was sort of new to the ordinary person, but it was not new to a lot of people, we found out. So yes, that is that is the big thing, is the motivation. And so often, there's no way that I'm suggesting that this particular incident had anything to do with it, but I'm not surprised that they threw in the Islamic radicals and a connection, and ISIS has claimed, you know, that he's one of them, you know, the guy that did all the shooting. So they're always using that, and there are some, the neocons would love to have a connection. And if there is a connection, that justifies their wars. Instead of saying the wars are causing the problem, they'll say, yes, it's those radicals. Look, they're infiltrating us now, and they've influenced our, you know, the people here in the United States. The truth is, the people who get killed by these massive shootings in this country are very, very rarely killed by, done by outsiders coming into our country. They're usually American-born who lost their way or became idiots. I do want to make one suggestion, then I go back to you, Chris, is that when there has been so many of these shootings domestically by young people in schools and things, almost always it's connected to psychotropic drugs. And if this guy was a little bit off his rocker and he lives in Las Vegas where drugs are readily available, who knows what he was on. But I hope when they do an autopsy, if they find it, who knows what will happen. Most time autopsies, they certainly didn't help us in the Kennedy assassination. But I believe it's very possible this guy could have been on drugs, but that again won't explain the whole picture.
Yes, you make some great points, especially about the focus on the weapons. And, you know, terrorists have done the same thing, killed the same amount of people with trucks, but there was no uproar for truck control or banning trucks. But with guns, it's knee-jerk. Well, you must ban them then. But banning, we know, doesn't work. Drugs are banned, but they're everywhere. Anybody could get them. So, but it's a feel-good solution that if government just bans these things, and that'll take care of the solution. But it's not the case, even remotely the case.
You know, and I imagine the numbers are 100 to 1 or even greater, the people we kill overseas versus the people that end up getting killed in the United States. So maybe banning guns in a specific incident might help. And that is the guns we sell. The guns, I mean, just think of those guns that we send to the moderates in Syria, because even though they're radicals and they're not really on our side, we give them their guns because they say, well, we want to get rid of Assad, so we want them to do our dirty work. So we give a lot of guns and weapons, and just think how many went into Libya, and then from Libya over into Syria, how many guns ended up in the hands of the people who were fighting the government people and the Americans who were in Iraq. So I would think that would be a great step in the right direction. Let's just ban the exporting of weapons. Let's cut down on the business on the arms industry. They're making a lot of money on this. It's a racket, and we know it, and it leads up to no good. And also, not only does it end up killing a lot of other people, it also sets the stage for blowback. And once again, this incident is not labeled blowback. Could be, but right now you can't say that. But there's still a lot of killing going on because we still have a lot of vulnerabilities overseas. The anger grows because, you know, now we have sort of a sterile way of killing people with drones. And, you know, we don't expose the lives of Americans, which is very good, but it doesn't diminish the hatred and the desire to get us out of those countries. I think most of the violence coming from those who want to kill Americans are the ones who are really want to defend their homeland. That's why sometimes they get support. We figure, why would they support these nutty people? It's mainly because they don't like foreigners in their land, just like we wouldn't want them in our land taking us over. So that, I think, is a lot to do. But that would mean that we have to change our foreign policy, and also the reason why it was absolutely necessary for the neocons not to allow people to start thinking that 9/11 was a consequence of a deeply flawed foreign policy.
Yes, and for my closing thought, Dr. Paul, even though we try to steer away from these bad ideas of looking to this violent government for solutions, and that we need more freedom, more private protection, this is not a utopian idea. It won't eliminate all violence because the human mind cannot be boxed in. We see it with the government. You can't box them in with rules. They'll just break them. And there will always be a small percentage of people that will be violent because we're free individuals. So there will be some that choose that road. Fortunately, the vast majority of people do not choose that road. If that was the case, life would be very, very tough. So I guess the main point is to stop looking for this one-size-fits-all solution from the Wizard of Oz in Washington, D.C., because it's just not going to happen.
Right, and I think the violence of government is really the big issue, and we have to address that, and that is exactly what we've been talking about. But if we don't understand that the government is not there to commit violence and set the stage for this, the government we should be restraining if anything. But they need to get out of the business of aggression and initiation of force and preemptive war, because this is what leads to so much trouble. Yes, we will continue to have violence. There will be violent people. There are sick people, and there are people who actually have not only derangement because they learned something that was wrong, but they've also been deranged organically too. But that's the way the world's been. But that doesn't mean that we have to declare war against the whole world and blame it on something that doesn't really exist, that they hate us because we're free. That is not the case. They have other justifications, but it's up to us to decide what our foreign policy ought to be and what our purpose is for our government. The purpose should be very limited. It's to protect liberty, to provide the rights of people to own property, the people to have voluntary contracts and have a voluntary society, not one that is overly regulated and depends on the violence of government redistributing wealth and telling people how to live. This ends up on the type of system we have today where everybody seems to be unhappy. But it could be reversed rather simply by just accepting the principle of non-aggression. Nobody, and especially government, do not have the right to initiate force against another person. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.